Hi, I'm Orlan. They used my name to build a fortune, then told the world I was ungrateful when I refused to fund their lies. It started at Thanksgiving, a spreadsheet of my net worth projected on the wall like a trophy. They clapped, then they voted. Not for me, but for what they thought I owed them. But that wasn't the worst part. They used deep fakes to rewrite my words, borrowed money under forged signatures, erased my face from the very photos I took for them, and through it all, they smiled for the cameras. So here's my question. What happens when your own blood turns your silence into their empire? Do you stay quiet? The drive into Flagstaff was quiet. That wasn't unusual. I'd always preferred silence over music, especially when I needed to brace myself. The mountains around the highway felt like walls closing in, familiar yet indifferent. This was home, technically, but I hadn't called it that in a long time. Pulling into the gravel driveway of my mother's house, I caught sight of the same peeling white shutters, the sagging mailbox, the rusted wind chimes that hadn't rung in years. A wave of distant memories hit me, not with warmth, but with a weight, like walking back into a room where you were once forgotten. I stepped out of the car, carrying only a single overnight bag and the bottle of Cabernet I'd picked up in Denver. No one came out to greet me. I had texted ahead. Be there around 3. Maybe they were inside. Maybe they just weren't waiting. The front door creaked louder than I remembered. Inside, voices floated through the air like background noise. Laughter, probably Theron's. I took a moment before stepping into the chaos, scanning for my seat at the table. It was long, as always, set with brown napkins folded like tiny tents, mismatched plates that had been in the family since I was a teenager. At one end sat my mother, Eunice, posture straight, smile tight, her pearls always perfectly centered. Theron, my older brother, was to her right, talking animatedly to Uncle George about building a personal brand. My nameplate was at the opposite end, near the kitchen entry, where the warmth of the food met the chill of the hallway. I sat down quietly. No one noticed. Across from me was Micah, Theron's son, 10 years old and already sharper than he let on. He waved. I smiled. Clarice, my grandmother, shuffled over slowly, resting her thin hand on my shoulder before sitting beside me. You look tired, she whispered. You still carry everything alone? I didn't answer. Instead, I looked down the table at Theron, hair too perfect, suit too pressed for a family dinner. I remembered a different version of him, years ago, when he'd piggybacked me across 2 miles of snow because I couldn't walk the last stretch home after a sledding fall. His jacket was soaked, his hands red. He'd never told Mom. That version of him, that brother, was nowhere to be seen tonight. Dinner progressed like a play we'd all rehearsed. My mother praised Theron's new consulting podcast, nodding vigorously while forgetting to mention the award my firm had won for community financial recovery. I didn't correct her. I never do. After the pie was served, the room dimmed. Theron clinked his glass with the side of his fork. We've got a little surprise, he announced, walking to the corner where a portable projector waited. A tribute, really. Family matters, right? The screen lit up, and suddenly my face was there, beside a bold title, Our Little Brother, the Silent Millionaire. A spreadsheet followed, my financials, my net worth, gross revenue, property holdings, clean, color-coded, exposed, $12.6 million across 7 investment vehicles. There was applause, laughter, some jokes I couldn't quite hear. I sat frozen. The wine in my hand didn't move. My throat tightened, not from shame, but from how they smiled like it was a gift. Like it was something to celebrate instead of a violation. Theron walked over, slid an arm around my shoulder, and leaned close enough for everyone to hear. You've made it, brother, he said, grinning. Now it's time you made it for all of us." The room went still. My fingers twitched near the stem of my glass. I kept my eyes on the screen, the numbers flickering like a verdict I never agreed to share. All eyes were on me now. There was a moment right after the laughter died, where the clinking of forks on plates sounded like hammers. No one said anything at first. The screen still glowed behind Theron, displaying my net worth like it was a PowerPoint slide in a boardroom meeting. I didn't move. I didn't breathe too loud. "Wow," Aunt Deirdre finally said. "I had no idea you were doing so well, Orlan." I didn't respond. The knot in my stomach pulled tighter. Theron leaned back into his chair like he was soaking in applause after a successful speech. Eunice, my mother, placed her napkin gently on her lap and cleared her throat. That sound had always been her cue, the prelude to a statement disguised as suggestion. "You've done so well, son," she said, folding her hands on the table. "Really, it's impressive. And maybe, just maybe, it's time you considered looking after the people who raised you." I turned to her slowly. Her tone was warm, but her eyes were fixed and expectant. Uncle George chuckled. "Theron's got big ideas. Just needs the right push. Some seed capital." He winked. "Wouldn't take much out of that figure we just saw." Cousin Elise piped up. "Theron could start his own podcast studio, or investment club." There was a murmur of agreement around the table, half serious, half sarcastic, but all with the same undercurrent. "You owe us." Theron held up his wine glass like a toast. "It's not a real vote," he said, laughing. "Just a family moment. Come on, let's show Orlan some love." One by one, hands raised, some playfully, some in earnest. Even my mother lifted hers, as if this moment were something we'd all agreed upon in advance. Then Micah, sitting beside her, raised both his little arms and clapped. "Yay! Dad's company!" he shouted. I felt the air go still around me, my hands, resting on the table, curled inward. The fork beside my plate trembled. My pulse throbbed in my ears. I stood up slowly. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steady. Theron grinned up at me. "Hey, lighten up. We're just having fun. You always were too sensitive." I walked through the kitchen and out the back door, stepping into the cool Arizona air. The scent of rosemary and pine lingered. A single porch light cast long shadows across the yard. I leaned on the railing and looked up at the sky. Black, starless. My thoughts wandered back to a winter long ago. One where I walked home from school without a proper coat, soaked in sleet, shivering. I hadn't told anyone, and no one had asked. I'd learned early that silence kept peace, even when it froze you inside. Footsteps behind me. Theron's cologne arrived first, citrus and something artificial. "You always wanted to be included," he said, voice low. "Congratulations, you finally are." I turned. The glow from the kitchen silhouetted him perfectly, like a character written to look reliable, but with a script full of betrayal. "You don't want inclusion," I said, meeting his eyes. "You want control." Back in Denver, the quiet felt dishonest. My condo was spotless, thermostat steady, fridge humming like always. But something in the air felt off. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I dropped my bag at the door, walked straight into the office, and sat in the same chair I always did after a trip. Except this time, the weight in my chest wouldn't let me exhale. I opened the laptop. The screen glared too bright, my eyes not ready for it. 46 unread emails. The top one flagged in red. Urgent. Loan payment past due. Final notice. I stared at it, blinking slowly. I hadn't taken a loan. Curiosity mixed with something darker as I clicked through. The document loaded fast. Terms, balances, an auto-debit setup. The amount was bold, unapologetic. $45,000. Business line of credit. Opened 4 months ago. Under my name. I clicked deeper, my fingers already starting to stiffen with tension. The e-signature was almost perfect. Only a single loop on the Y in my last name curled wrong. I'd never have looped it that way. And then, there it was, in the account recovery contact field. Theron's old Gmail address. The one he used before he went professional. The rage didn't explode. It just settled in, like black coffee left out too long. Bitter, stale, inescapable. I opened a new window, logged into the family banking portal I hadn't touched in months. Transfers to our mother and father totaled nearly $20,000 over the past year. Each one labeled like a good son's resume. Home repairs, roof leak, car breakdown, insurance lapse. I called Eunice. She answered on the second ring. Orlan, everything okay? Yeah, just checking in. How's the roof holding up? There was a pause. Still patched with duct tape. Why? I thanked her and hung up before she could ask anything else. That was the last piece I needed. Back at the screen, I scrolled through line after line of false crises. There had been no roof leak, no car emergency, no insurance lapse. Just Theron using my name, again and again, to prop up his image and his plans. And our mother either knew or never asked. I closed the laptop without shutting it down. The fan kept whirring. I walked over to the corkboard in the corner of my office. Most people used these to pin family photos or vacation postcards. Mine had always held numbers, timelines, charts, strategy maps. Tonight I changed that. I printed the forged loan document, pinned it top center. Then I opened a drawer, pulled out a Thanksgiving photo from 2 years ago. Everyone around the table, laughing, even me. I pinned that below the document. Above it, I scrawled a single label. The cost of silence. I stood there, unmoving, staring at the board until my knees locked. Clarice's voice echoed in my mind, something she told me once when I was still a teenager, when I had let a friend cheat off my homework and got caught for it. They only take from you if you let them. That had stung back then. It didn't sting now. It rang true. I moved to the file cabinet, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out the red folder. On its tab, the words "Emergency Response" glinted under the desk lamp. Inside, a list. Lawyer, auditor, forensic tech. I picked up the phone, scrolled to the first contact, stared at the name for a moment. Then I pressed call. I met Marla Thorne at her co-working suite just past 9 the next morning. It was one of those modern setups. Exposed brick, big windows, the kind of place designed to make legal work feel less like warfare. She waved me in, her silver bob as sharp as her blazer, and gestured to the stack of papers already waiting. You weren't exaggerating, she said, flipping through the printed emails and bank documents. Forged loan, misappropriated funds, and this is straight-up identity manipulation. She wasn't flustered. If anything, she looked energized. I envied that. My body felt like it was still strapped to that Thanksgiving table. I want to file preemptively, she said. Freezing certain assets will keep them from making this worse. I nodded, but didn't answer. My mouth felt dry. It wasn't that I doubted the case. The evidence was airtight. I just wasn't sure I was ready to become the guy who sues his own brother, who drags his last name through public filings. You're not starting a war, Orlan, Marla added. You're ending one. As I left her office and stepped onto the street, my phone rang. The caller ID read, Mom. I nearly let it go to voicemail. But old habits die loud. Hi, Ma, I said, keeping my voice neutral. She didn't launch into accusations. There was no anger, just a quiet, breathy, almost tender tone. "I heard you've been upset. I get it," she said. "But this, whatever you're thinking of doing, can we not go there?" I let her speak. "It would destroy Theron, and your father's memory, the family name. It won't recover. Is that what you want?" My jaw tightened. "You've always been the quiet one," she said, her voice softening. "Please stay that way." She hung up before I could answer. Back at home, I didn't bother unpacking. I stood by the fridge, drinking water straight from the bottle, my ears ringing from her final words. Be the silent one. Later that afternoon, I opened an email forwarded by a nonprofit I had donated to last year. It was an invite to a community event. Local Family Legacy Impact Awards. I scanned the details. Keynote speaker, Theron Vexley. My name? Nowhere. I clicked attend and left the RSVP section blank. The event was hosted at a city auditorium 2 blocks from where I'd built the financial literacy program 4 years ago. When I arrived, I didn't check in. Just nodded at the volunteers and found a seat near the back. The slideshow began just after sunset. Faces I knew appeared on the screen, community leaders, donors, students. Then came a photo from the scholarship launch. I knew the shot. I'd been in it, standing left of Theron, holding the oversized check. But in this version, I wasn't there. Another photo. Same setting, same banner in the background. But again, only Theron. It was like someone had taken a scalpel to the past and removed me, frame by frame. I pulled out my phone and snapped a shot of the edited projection mid-slide. I didn't zoom. I didn't filter. Just cold evidence. Applause rose as Theron took the stage. He smiled wide, buttoned his jacket like a politician, and said, "I've always believed in family, in building something lasting. And thanks to the support of the community, and of course my own journey, I'm proud to say the Vexley legacy is just beginning." Afterward, he slipped backstage through a side curtain. I followed. The hallway behind the curtain smelled like sweat and plastic, the way all cheap civic centers do. He turned when he heard my footsteps. No surprise in his eyes, just smug confidence. I held up my phone, showing him the cropped photo I'd just taken. "You erase me all you want," I said, voice calm, "but don't expect me to stay gone." 2 days after the meeting backstage with Theron, a forwarded email landed in my inbox. The subject line read, "Flagstaff Family Builders Gala, Invitation." It came from a distant cousin I hadn't spoken to since high school, who added, "Thought you'd want to see this. Big night for Theron, I guess." I opened the flyer. Right at the top, in bold serif type, were the words, "Celebrating Community Legacy, the Vexley Vision." Beneath it, a smiling photo of Theron, hand extended in a mock handshake, with the caption, "Keynote speaker and founding patron, Theron Vexley." I scanned the entire page twice. No mention of me, not even a "thank you to contributors." But I recognized the name of the scholarship, the one I'd quietly funded, the one I'd watched grow from a kitchen table idea into something real. My name had been scrubbed clean from it, like chalk washed off a sidewalk after a storm. Saturday evening came with a chill in the air. The parking lot outside the Civic Center was packed. I parked down the street and walked the rest of the way, unnoticed, sliding through the side doors before the volunteer greeters could ask my name. Inside, the space was dressed to impress. Borrowed elegance, rented ferns, faux marble panels. Strings of soft white lights curled along the rafters. A looping slideshow played near the entrance. I watched for a moment, then saw it. One photo showed a check presentation from the previous year. I remembered that day. It had been warm, windy, and the oversized check kept threatening to blow away. I had stood beside Theron, one hand holding the bottom corner of the foam board. In this version, I wasn't in the frame. The photo had been cropped. The check was smaller, the angle tighter, only Theron visible. Another image, then another. The same story. Either I'd been cropped, blurred, or skipped. The narrative had been rewritten frame by frame, and none of it included me. I kept moving, blending into the crowd. A display booth stood near the stage with a massive banner. Theron Vexley Foundation for Academic Excellence. Below it, a quote I'd written for my keynote the year before. Education builds not only careers, but character. Attributed, of course, to Theron. As the lights dimmed and the audience settled into their seats, I slipped into a chair near the back. I pulled my hoodie forward slightly. No one noticed. All eyes were on the screen. The video montage began. Slow piano chords, voiceover about legacy, clips from various community events. I recognized all of them. I'd helped organize every single one. But in the footage, I was either absent or edited out. Even the clip from the scholarship launch, the check, again, held solely by Theron, smiling like he'd carved it out of stone himself. I recorded the montage quietly with my phone. Theron stepped onto the stage to a round of applause. He buttoned his suit, nodded once to the audience, and began. "Thank you for believing in us," he said, placing a hand over his heart. "This community, this mission, it's bigger than one person, but I'm honored to carry the torch." A few claps, some amen murmurs from the church folks in the front row. In the shadows, I whispered to myself, "They rewrote the truth. Time to publish the footnotes." As the event wound down, people flocked to the donation table. I waited until the crowd thinned, then approached. A young volunteer smiled and held out a clipboard. I nodded politely, handed her a sealed white envelope, and said, "This one's for the archives." Inside the envelope was a flash drive. On it, the full keynote I gave last year, uncut. The original photos, the receipts. A time-stamped copy of the wire transfer that funded the scholarship's launch, from my account. And a note. It read, "This was never yours to claim." 3 days after the gala, I sat at my desk staring at the corkboard across the room. The morning light filtered in through the blinds in thin stripes, hitting the papers like spotlights in a courtroom. I had pinned each document there like evidence in a personal trial, forged invoices, bank statements, falsified wire memos. Each one carried my name. Each one I had never authorized. The board looked less like an investigation now and more like a confession, a map of betrayal in ink and numbers. The final line I added the night before read simply, "Total, 94,002 attenders." I opened my finance dashboard, toggled to the recurring transfers tab, and hovered the mouse over the final set of active payments, auto debits to my parents' account, monthly support disguised as necessity. I clicked disable one by one. No ceremony, no second thoughts. When the last one disappeared, a silence settled over me that felt different than the ones before. Not relief, not sadness, just completion. I slid open a drawer and pulled out the checkbook I hadn't touched in years. My hand moved steadily as I wrote the amount, enough to cover every dime I'd sent in the past year. The memo line read, "Final." I folded the check once, placed it inside a cream-colored envelope, and wrote in thick black ink across the front. "This is where it ends." It wasn't about the money. It had never really been about the money. The printer beside me beeped with a new alert. I turned to it, expecting a low toner warning. Instead, my phone buzzed at the same time. A message from Marla. I picked up. "They filed a freeze," she said without preamble. "On your business account, using the forged power of attorney document. It passed preliminary processing because the notary seal was copied." I took a long breath, rubbing my eyes with the heel of my palm. "They hit first," I said. "Yep," she replied. "I'm sending over the reversal paperwork now, and a full report to the state bar." I forwarded her the verified documents we'd organized. Signatures, timestamps, security footage of me shredding the only notarized POA years ago. It was strange, the clarity that comes when you stop trying to be understood and start defending yourself with facts. By mid-afternoon, the check was sealed, stamped, and ready for the mailbox. I stood with it at the edge of the hallway, staring at the tiny red flag on the box outside my condo. In that moment, my mind drifted to the first time I ever made real money. I was 28. I'd gotten my first firm bonus, $6,200. I'd mailed it straight to my mom, no note. She'd called me crying. "You're such a good son," she said. But over time, the giving had turned into obligation, and then into manipulation. I had paid medical bills that didn't exist, bought groceries that never reached their kitchen, fixed a roof that was never touched, and each time, the silence I received in return grew louder. I placed the envelope in the mailbox and lifted the flag. "That was the last check you'll ever cash in my name," I said out loud. My voice didn't shake. I turned back inside and settled into my chair. Just as I reached for my glass of water, my laptop pinged with a new alert. The subject line blinked like a warning flare. "New transaction flagged. Incoming legal motion from Vexley Holdings." I woke to 17 missed calls. The screen of my phone glowed against the early morning dark. The notifications kept piling in, text after text, most with the same urgent question. "Have you seen the video?" I didn't want to click. My thumb hovered over the link someone had sent from a local Flagstaff Facebook page. The thumbnail was a familiar image, me smiling stiffly in a charcoal suit, but the title beneath it sent a chill down my spine. "Orlan Vexley, A Brother's Gratitude." The clip began automatically. There I was, sitting in what looked like a recent interview setup, thanking Theron. Not just a polite nod, I was saying things I'd never said, never thought. "I owe so much to my brother. His guidance shaped me. None of this would have happened without him. Except the video wasn't real. The audio didn't sync. The tone was off, the cutaways too smooth. They'd taken fragments of past speeches, old B-roll, spliced interviews, and built a Frankenstein tribute I never gave. It was AI. I ran the video frame by frame. The collar of my jacket changed mid-sentence. My voice shifted subtly from one quote to another, like a radio signal glitching. I forwarded the link to Ethan, a digital forensics friend I'd worked with during a past case. 15 minutes later, he texted back. "Confirmed. Deepfake, high-end, trained on your podcast archives. Someone spent real money." And then it snowballed. By mid-morning, the local paper had picked it up. "Estranged millionaire finally credits family." The headline ran beneath a warm photo of Theron with his arms outstretched, like he was welcoming me home from exile. My inbox filled with client emails. "Happy for your reconciliation." "Wow, powerful clip, Orlan." "Didn't know your brother helped you start the firm. Cool story." Cool story. I watched the video again, not with rage, but with analysis. I saw what they had done, saw how precisely they'd restitched my identity into a narrative I'd fought for years to detach from. Theron followed it up with a PR barrage. Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, posts about family unity, about forgiveness, about how love always wins. One image had him holding up a Thanksgiving pie, captioned, "Orlan's favorite, always was, always will be." People commented, "So glad he came around." "You two give us hope." My sister and I stopped talking. Maybe I should reach out. Some even messaged me privately, thanking me for setting an example of healing. Healing? I hadn't said a word. I hadn't agreed to anything. I hadn't healed. I'd been hijacked. I could have fired back. Could have done an exposé, called every journalist I knew. But instead, I did what I always did when the noise grew too loud. I sat at my desk and opened my camera. In my study, with the blinds drawn and nothing but the soft hum of my computer fan, I hit record. "I'm not here to go viral," I said calmly. "The truth rarely does." I didn't raise my voice, didn't name names, I simply laid it bare. "Everything you've seen online lately, those words didn't come from me. But if you want to know what I do believe, it's this. Loyalty without honesty is a lie dressed in a family photo." I looked into the camera. The truth isn't always flashy, but it's traceable. I posted it to LinkedIn and my legal blog. No hashtags, no dramatic font. 10 minutes later, a message popped up on my phone. It was from Sybil, Theron's wife. "You should see what he did next," she wrote. Attached was a new link. This time the thumbnail was grainy. Old footage. Me, at 14, crying beside my father's casket. The title read, "The Redemption of Orlan, A Brother's Love Through Loss." Narrated by Theron. The notification popped up at the corner of my screen at 11:42 p.m. I almost didn't click. I was closing tabs, half reading a forum post on fiduciary abuse, when the alert chimed. "New video tagged with your name." At first, I thought it was another edited tribute or some AI-filtered nonsense. Then I hit play. It was grainy, obviously from a hidden camera, the kind installed in green rooms and forgotten about. The audio clicked on mid-laugh. Theron sat with a stylist, sipping something amber in a plastic cup. His voice was unmistakable. "That idiot still thinks we need him. He'll pay up. He always does." My heart didn't drop. It calcified. The video was less than 30 seconds, but it didn't need to be longer. He leaned back, smirking. "Give it 3 more weeks. He'll come crawling." It ended with him checking his teeth in the mirror. Sybil's text came seconds later. "I didn't mean for this to leak, but maybe it had to." I stared at the screen. The video had already amassed thousands of views on a community watch group. Comments were pouring in by the minute. "Fraud. Manipulative bastard. Wait, this is the scholarship guy?" The narrative flipped fast. People I hadn't heard from in years tagged me with nothing but a question mark. Others messaged, "Is this real?" Or worse, "I always had a weird feeling about him." By morning, hashtags I never imagined seeing existed. Theron the thief? Vexley vanish? Justice for Orlan. My inbox, once filled with clients trying to be polite, now brimmed with publicists offering to help shape the story. I ignored them all. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. I felt seen. Then Cillian Rowe emailed me. The subject line was simple. "Something you need." Attached were screenshots, text threads between Theron and a woman named Delia Morris, time-stamped months ago. She was an old flame of Theron's, now a teacher in the next county over. In the messages, Theron flirted, then begged for help, said he was building a community mentorship center, needed access to a grant, but couldn't qualify a loan. She agreed to co-sign. "Only because Orlan's name is on the idea," she wrote. Theron replied, "Don't worry, he'll never know." She never got repaid. He ghosted her once the funding cleared. Cillian also attached a scan of the forged paperwork she found in an old dresser. Theron had left it behind. His signature was fake. Mine was replicated from a business card scan, and under the line labeled Founder, he had typed Theron Vexley, Visionary. The irony clawed at me. By noon, the Foundation's website went dark. Its Instagram vanished. Sponsors issued quiet statements, no direct names, just vague internal review announcements. But the community wasn't vague. A Flagstaff Facebook group, Proud Sons and Daughters, launched a poll. Should Theron Vexley be removed from the board? Within 2 hours, over 4,300 votes were cast. 93% voted yes. One comment said, "He tried to build a legacy on someone else's blood. That's not family. That's theft." Another, "My cousin worked that event last year. Orlan's name was on the banner. She remembers." I sat on the edge of my couch, laptop open, fingers numb. I watched the leaked video again. The way he laughed, the smug tilt of his head, the arrogance, and then I clicked download, saved the file into a new folder. I labeled it Exhibit A, Court. The Flagstaff courthouse looked smaller than I remembered. Pale stone, red brick trim, and that old carved inscription above the doors. Lex Justitia Veritas. Law, justice, truth. Funny how it always read more like a dare than a promise. Marla walked beside me, heels clicking sharply on the tile. She held the folder marked Legacy Theft close to her chest like it carried dynamite. Inside, it basically did. Theron was already there, seated at the defense table. Same smug posture, tie too tight, like he'd dressed not for court, but for a photo shoot. He didn't look at me. Didn't need to. That same air of invincibility clung to him like cologne. In the gallery, Clarice sat quietly in the third row. She hadn't spoken much on the phone when I called to tell her I was coming, but now her hands rested on her lap, folded like prayer. She gave me one small nod, the kind that held decades. When court opened, Marla rose first. She didn't start with drama. She didn't need to. She opened with the dressing room video. Theron's voice filled the room. "That idiot still thinks we need him. He'll pay up. He always does." There was a ripple, not audible, but visible. Shoulders tensed. One juror raised an eyebrow. She followed it with screenshots, the foundation checklists, the falsified receipts, the fabricated press releases. Then the email chain with the ex-girlfriend, Delia, who had given Theron her signature on a grant proposal thinking it was Orlan's project. "That woman," Marla said, "now pays monthly on a co-signed debt she never agreed to, for a vision that was never his." Theron's lawyer stood up 3 times to object. The judge overruled him twice. By the 3rd time, he didn't bother. Then I took the stand. Marla handed me the final piece, a printed email, date stamped 3 weeks prior. It had been sent accidentally from Theron's legal counsel to my own inbox. The subject, reputation containment. It read, in part, "If Orlan presses, we bury him. Emotional bankruptcy works better than financial. Play the long game, push gratitude." I read that part aloud. Gasps weren't dramatic. They were personal. One juror shook his head and looked down. The bailiff narrowed his eyes. Even the judge blinked once, slowly. I handed it back to Marla and sat down. The courtroom was silent for a long time after. When the ruling came, it was short. Defamation? Proven. Asset misrepresentation? Confirmed. Fraud? Clear. The judge ordered damages paid, accounts corrected, all ties between Theron and the foundation severed. He had to resign immediately, publicly, on record. I didn't look at Theron as the words were read. I watched my mother. Eunice sat 3 rows behind Clarice. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She just looked straight ahead, not at me, not at the judge, just away. When court adjourned, Clarice stood up and touched my shoulder. "Truth doesn't need to shout," she said, "but when it does, it echoes." Outside, the press had gathered. Cameras, reporters, microphones shoved into Theron's face. He shoved past them without a word, his suit rumpled for the first time in years. Marla and I walked side by side toward the parking lot. "It's over," I said. "Legally?" she replied. "Yes." "Personally?" She glanced over. "That's your call." Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Sybil. 3 words. "He's not done." The envelope was thick, sealed with a wax stamp I hadn't seen since the early 90s. My name, Orlan, written in my grandmother's unmistakable hand, curved low across the center. No return address, just a postmark from Topeka. Inside was a folded note, no more than 7 words. "Visit before this ends. Grandma." That was all it took. The drive from Denver to Topeka was long and quiet. I took back roads for the last hour, not to avoid traffic, but to feel something familiar. The flat Kansas landscape stretching out on either side like a memory too wide to frame. Clarice lived in the same house she had since my grandfather passed. The screen door still creaked in protest when I opened it. She met me at the threshold without a word, pulled me into a hug that was more breath than muscle. "Come," she said simply, leading me to the back room. We sat at the old cedar chest she used to store family quilts and photographs. From beneath a wrapped flannel, she lifted a small VHS tape in a hard plastic case and a manila envelope stamped, "Private, Last Testament." "This is your father's original will," she said, placing the items on the table, "before your mother and her lawyers amended anything." I opened it slowly. The paper was faded, but the words were clear. "To the child who keeps peace and protects legacy with integrity, all assets, decisions, and responsibilities shall pass." Below, his signature, witnessed, sealed. I looked up. "You never showed this before." "You weren't ready to see it." She inserted the VHS into an old player perched under the TV. The screen crackled, then focused. There was my father, in a room I barely remembered. He looked tired, but certain. "I've seen what pride does to family," he said, "and what silence costs. My hope is not in perfection, but in responsibility. Theron has charm, but legacy demands more than that." I didn't realize I was crying until Clarice handed me a tissue. We sat there, neither of us speaking, until the tape ended in static. I drove back to Denver the next morning. Halfway through Kansas, my phone buzzed. It was an email from the board of the church my family had attended for decades. "Dear Orlan, in light of recent events, we encourage all parties to seek peace and healing. We kindly request that further division not be pursued publicly, as the reputation of the Vexley name impacts us all." The message was signed, "With grace," but it read like a verdict. When I got home, I made tea, opened my laptop, and began to write. I didn't lash out. I didn't correct them with venom. I wrote with calm precision. Legacy should never be built on silence. Attached are the documents, footage, and verified communications related to my actions. I do not wish to argue. I wish only for truth to have equal footing with memory. I attached the files and sent it back to the board. That night, I placed the original will in my office safe, labeling the drawer "Heirloom Only." I sat down and opened a new document. At the top, I typed, "My true last will and testament." Before I could begin writing, my phone buzzed again. New number. "They want to make a deal." Cillian Rowe never called unless something was wrong. His voice on the other end wasn't angry. It was worse, cold, distant, like he'd rehearsed it. "Heard you sued your own family," he said. "And now you're rewriting history?" I sat still, phone pressed to my ear. Didn't defend, didn't explain. Just listened as Cillian rattled off vague frustrations and ended with, "You used to be the quiet one. I miss that version of you." The line clicked dead before I could respond. I left the office a few minutes later, trading spreadsheets for sneakers, and walked aimlessly toward Cheeseman Park. It had been years since I'd crossed its gravel paths, but I still remembered the layout like the back of my hand, the bench where we used to eat hot, dogs, the corner by the lilac bushes where Clarice once braided my hair while Theron tried to climb a tree and fell flat on his back. The air was colder now, sharper. Each breath stung. Back then, silence was safety, a warm blanket you could wrap around conflict. Now, it felt like exile. The price of telling the truth wasn't noise, it was being unheard. I stopped at a small coffee shop tucked near the park's edge, ordered black coffee, no cream, and sat near the window. Two elderly women at the next table were mid-conversation. I wasn't eavesdropping. They weren't whispering. "You hear about that family from the scholarship drama?" one asked. The other nodded. "Messy. Real shame. I can't believe the younger one turned on them like that. That legacy used to mean something." I stared at my cup, fingers tightening around the ceramic. That's how it would always be, I realized. To some, I'd never be more than a headline. The bitter brother, the ungrateful son. No document or court ruling would change that. Truth didn't clean a name. Only time did. And even then, not always. By the time I returned to the office, the sky had dimmed. I sat down, opened a fresh document, and wrote, "I owe nothing but the truth, and I've given it." It wasn't a manifesto, just a final note. I sent it quietly to my PR contact with instructions to forward to select colleagues and donors. No blog posts, no press. Just closure. That evening, a meeting took me back to Flagstaff. One of those unavoidable business loops no one wants to take, but can't decline. As I drove past familiar intersections, muscle memory guided me until I realized where I was. The Price family home. It looked smaller now, not in size, in weight, in myth. The porch light was off. No laughter spilled out onto the lawn, no sign of life beyond the barely flickering hallway bulb through a sheer curtain. I didn't knock. I stepped out of the car, walked to the front door, and placed a plain white envelope beneath the mat. Inside was a photo, the original from that Thanksgiving. No edits, no projections, no missing chairs. All of us were there, even me. The ribbon was thick, navy blue, taut across the entrance of the newly renovated building. Denver's early spring sun stretched long across the sidewalk, catching the fresh paint, the polished brass fixtures, the new name engraved in gold above the doors, Clarice Price Scholarship Initiative. I stood at the podium just outside the entrance. No teleprompters, no stage lights, just a small group of invited guests, former scholarship recipients, donors, community leaders, and a few quiet friends who'd stood by me when the noise was loudest. "Some people believe legacy is inherited," I began, voice steady, not loud. "But legacy isn't a name. It's not a bloodline. It's not something you own. Legacy is what you protect, and it's defined by what you're willing to lose to do so." A few heads nodded. No one clapped. This wasn't that kind of speech. I turned slightly and pulled back the cloth from the foundation plaque mounted beside the door. Beneath my grandmother's name, a quote was etched into the stone. "Blood does not entitle legacy. Integrity does." Clarice had written those words in a letter to me years ago, back when I was still trying to outwork silence. Later that afternoon, after the reception ended and the last handshake faded, I sat in my office and allowed myself to remember. I thought back to the envelope I'd left at the Price doorstep weeks ago. The unedited Thanksgiving photo inside, folded once, no note. Theron had called that night. I didn't answer. He tried again the next morning. Still no answer. That was the goodbye. Not with venom, not with fire, just clarity. The final silence I chose. A week later, I got a voice message. It came from Sybil, forwarded to my private line, a recording of Theron. His voice, quieter than I'd ever heard it, edges frayed like an old rope. "I never knew how much of my life was built on your silence," he said. "Now I do, and it's collapsing." I listened once, then deleted it. Didn't save, didn't reply. In the lobby of the new building, beneath a high archway of reclaimed brick, sat a small glass display case. Inside, on velvet, rested the old family pocket watch, the one my father used to carry, the one that had once stopped ticking the day we buried him. Now it ticked, steady, clean. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Time doesn't make wounds disappear, but it reminds you what you've survived." No one noticed when I slipped out the back of the building just before sunset. I walked a block down to the edge of the park. A warm breeze curled around my collar. Spring birds dipped low through the air, chasing light. I turned back once, looking at the foundation. It didn't feel like revenge. It didn't feel like a monument. It felt like breath. I smiled and whispered to myself, not just out of the past, beyond it. This was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming peace. Some stories don't end with a slam of the gavel or a check written in defiance. They end in the quiet, in the moments you choose not to respond, not to return, not to repeat the cycle. If there's one thing I've learned through this journey, it's this. Silence can be a cage or a choice. For years, I thought staying quiet was how you earned peace. But real peace doesn't come from avoiding conflict. It comes from facing it and walking away when you no longer owe anyone your pain. Maybe you felt it too. The weight of legacy, the guilt of outgrowing those who refuse to see your worth. Maybe you've been told that loyalty means keeping secrets, even when those secrets corrode your soul. I'm here to tell you it doesn't. Sometimes, protecting your legacy means protecting yourself, not out of revenge, but out of respect for what you've endured and who you're becoming. So let me ask you, have you ever walked away from something that was supposed to define you, not out of anger, but clarity? Have you ever had to rebuild your name, not for applause, but to hear yourself breathe again? I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment. Let me know where you're watching from, or just type 1 if this hit home. And if this wasn't for you, tell me why. Let's make space for all sides here. If this video moved you, even a little, I invite you to subscribe. We have more stories ahead, stories that dig deep, tell the truth, and maybe, just maybe, help you tell yours. Thanks for being here.